Ladies and gentlemen, open banking pioneers, hello and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us around our campfire. Now, we're here today to talk about open banking across borders, solving the interoperability challenge. Now, this is a crucial topic and a very important one that could truly propel open banking into the stratosphere. So that is the potential of a seamless cross-border open banking and open finance. So we're looking at a globally consistent and a globally scalable proposition. Now that's the goal, but it's also the challenge. But there is one major problem to interoperability. And I always think the easiest way to relate to this current challenge is using the comparison to travel adapters. When we travel abroad and want to charge our phones, if we've not packed the right adapter for the plug socket, then our phones aren't going to work. But if we have a travel adapter, then we can plug in our phones and all is normal. Now, I travel around the world, probably like you, and literally have a bag full of travel adapters with a different combination of shapes and sizes. I have round ones, square ones, I have 3-pinned ones, 2-pinned ones that splay apart. Oh my word, it's a nightmare. I actually have to have a quick Google before I travel just to double check. This is ultimately what the question of cross-border open banking interoperability is trying to solve. An open banking travel plug that will power a global ecosystem where data can flow freely and seamlessly across borders, powering the ecosystem. Now, until our briefing call this week, I, maybe like yourself, saw that interoperability was mainly, on the large, focused around standards and standards compatibility. It wasn't until Lauren, who we have on the panel from Consensus, enlightened us, throwing in more aspects into the mix, widening the debate. Now, I'm not going to steal Lauren's thunder. That's just not my style. So please, I would urge you, have a listen to what she has to say. Now, as more and more countries around the world embrace open banking, interoperability is going to be an increasingly important for regulators to consider as they begin to shape their domestic open banking rules. And if we look at the UK, where, and you'll have heard many, many times, that expression, we created the blueprint for open banking. And we've seen now how the stars are aligning with what the Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee, JROC, are doing, and they continue to act as our North Guiding Star, driving open banking forwards. But from a global perspective, other countries are now getting their stars aligned. You only need to have a look at what's happening in the States. For example, we've got the proposed implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act, Section 1033, and that's going to give consumers more control and more protection over how they will share their financial data. Now, it's highly likely that FDX standards will be adopted. Now, so what's the opportunity in the US? What are the challenges around interoperability? And what does this really mean? Well, you can learn more about this and the impact it will have on the market in our Transatlantic Index USA. And we're producing it with MasterCard, who, great to have David back on the panel, Oxford University and FDX. So should the UK lead on standards? Does it really matter? Well, interoperability is key for global expansion and for, importantly, momentum. Just think for a moment what Apple are doing and what Apple have released. So if we can get countries to align, just think about the potential opportunity this will create. Now, the number of open banking users globally is expected this year to reach 132 million. And that's already a massive uptick from the 24.7 million back in 2020, that was. So with improved cross-border interoperability, the greater possibilities there's going to be, it's going to widen the market, it's going to increase innovation. And in turn, that's going to mean better customer experiences and an opportunity for growth, whether that's faster cross-border payments, easier data sharing, or use cases that maybe haven't even been thought of yet. But to get to that point, there are several challenges that we need to collectively address as an industry. And we're going to be exploring those in our session today. So to help us answer these questions and discuss what we need to do to make borderless open banking a reality, we have an esteemed lineup of very special guests that have joined us very kindly around our campfire. Now, what we would love you to do as an audience is to get involved. There's two ways to get involved. You can ask the panel questions, and on the right of your screen, you'll see the Slido poll. And the question is, how important is collaboration, that key industry word, between traditional banks and FinTechs in achieving interoperability? Now, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Liz Lumley. She's the deputy editor of The Banker, and she will be hosting today's campfire. Liz will be starting with the fireside chat with David Head, who is the Vice President of Open Banking Products. And I'll let her introduce her own panel. So Liz, it is wonderful to have you back. Thank you so much. Liz, over to you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Excellent. And welcome audience as well. So before we start our panel, as Helen mentioned, we're going to have a bit of an intro, a primer with David Head of MasterCard. So I'd love to invite David to join me for a bit of a fireside chat, fire next to the campfire, so we can start off our discussion.
Hello, Liz.
Hey,
nice
how are
to
you?
Be here. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Excellent. So we're going to talk, of course, we're talking about cross-border interoperability in terms of the context of open banking. Why is this important for MasterCard?
That's a great question. So let's start with, why is open banking important to MasterCard? And then we'll talk interoperability. I mean, open banking for MasterCard, we are committed to giving consumers and small businesses more control over their data and their payments. And as such, we've got a large and growing open banking business, both in the UK, in Europe, in the US, and in Australia. And I guess that gives us the framework for why we're looking at this interoperability sort of question. When we think about interoperability, we think about it's about enabling companies to connect into as many banks as possible in as many different geographies as they wish, as smoothly as possible. And what interoperability is doing is like making that process as smooth as we can do. Why are we as MasterCard interested in that? Well, I guess it's MasterCard's, it's part of our DNA. You know, we've been facilitating payments and data globally for getting on 50 years, whether that's through card networks, account-to-account payments, and now very much through open banking. And it's the heart of our open banking propositions, where we're providing access to thousands of banks through a very simple interface that's got us into this debate and this discussion. Interoperability and making it smooth is what we're about. And what our customers are asking us for is very much that ability to do their open banking across borders. We've got a number of our clients, particularly in the Nordics, who want to work not just in one market, they want to work in Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Finland. And if to work with them, that they want a consistent way of doing that. And therefore, it gives us that challenge of how do we make that process smooth for them and their customers? How do we make it the same as possible? We've got regionals across Europe, people, we've got an investment company working with us who want to be able to take payments from any bank account across Europe and bring that in and present their customers the same experience, whether they are paying in from France, Germany, Denmark, or the UK. And what we're thirdly seeing is that some of our big global clients who are sort of doing open banking in, say, the US and successfully doing it there want to bring their propositions to other regions. And therefore, that topic of how we do that and make that easy for them is what's fueling what we do for sort of around open banking and interoperability now. So we are very much it. Why is it important to us? Because open banking is important. Interoperability and connectivity is what we do, and our customers want it.
Yeah, you have to forgive me because I have a bit of a follow-up question with this. Over the years of, looking at improvements and progress in payment systems, I've always observed how the card schemes really try to keep themselves in the loop. And I've often thought that open banking is kind of, would take the cards out of the equation. But if you're looking at like the role MasterCard, card schemes play in the world, it is that ubiquitous global access point. Is that how you're kind of positioning yourself as being that, we will help with interoperability because that's basically that's what we do globally anyway in this
Absolutely.
world.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, we are, it's beyond cards. We MasterCard that's our heritage is cards, but we're involved in all sort of payment rails. It's about payments and it's about facilitating payments around the world, whatever that underlying payment rail is, making it simple and easy and secure for our customers to access. That's very much what we're about, and hence why we're very active in open banking.
So Helen talked a bit about plugs and sockets internationally. What are some of the benefits of this cross-border interoperability?
Yeah, no, I think ultimately, the greater the level of interoperability, the stronger and more vibrant the open banking ecosystem will become. That's kind of what I strongly believe. And if I look at it from kind of two dimensions of why I think that, if you look at kind of the end user and why there's benefits there, is that we see that end users, increasingly consumers will bank across multiple countries. They'll have bank accounts in Germany and France, and therefore they will want to manage their money in the same way, in the same consistent way. You have businesses who want to collect payments from across borders, and they want alternatives to cards. And so from that perspective, the benefits then of interoperability is giving them choice and giving them a range of services they don't necessarily need to do, and reducing, making things more convenient for them. The kind of the second lens that I sort of look at it, or second dimension, is very much from the people developing apps. If you're developing solutions, if you can take the same solution and move it across markets with less tailoring required, it's more economically viable for you. And therefore you can take it to more markets and you can expand. It creates opportunity. So more interoperable, the wider you can take your products, the more you can sell. And then if you take those two dimensions together and macro it up from a sort of market level, what you're doing there is stimulating innovation. You're making it justifiable for people to make the investments, particularly in smaller markets where you couldn't necessarily justify the investment if you were just targeting one small market. But if you can put a number of markets together, there's a reason for it. Yeah, so the business case becomes stronger. And if you've got that sort of innovation and richness across borders, you're driving up competition. Competition will get into better products. You're reducing barriers to entry, which makes it easier for people to do. And then that swings back to the consumers, that you're getting increased choice and increased range of things you can do. So overall, I think it is very much, more interoperable it is, the stronger the ecosystem, the more players that you're allowed, and then the more you can bring in.
So what are some of the challenges we're facing then?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That is a very good question, because on one level, you look at open banking and you go, well, banking is banking, isn't it? It's all about payments and it's about, statements, and they're the same. And if you think about the way, particularly in the EU, that open banking has been designed, it is very much about facilitating cross-border interoperability. It's been designed so that entities in various markets can operate. But I think where the challenges are is I would pull down, it's very much into the small things make a big difference. And I think that's where you go. So if you start down sort of the real sort of fundamental level about the data between different markets have different data. So for example, we've got a client who working very well in France with a credit decisioning model using data pulled from French banks. They wanted to go to Spain and take the same model there. And what they found was that when we looked into the details of the Spanish market, there were a couple of data fields that made a big difference that just weren't available. The banks didn't provide a marker, whether it was a business or a personal account. And that fundamentally changed the way that the credit scoring model they designed worked, and therefore changed its viability and its attractiveness for the Spanish market. You also look at within the data from a payments perspective, it can also be different in terms of, we do a lot of work in the Nordics, and billing in the Nordics, there are very specific codes that you need to attach to transactions to make a billing payment pass through. And there's some real anomalies that you get in terms of telcos in certain markets have to have a certain sort of code length. All of these little things, whilst on the size thing, don't sound big, but they make a challenge, they create blockages, and they stop business cases coming. So you've got this kind of data level. You've then got the way the banks themselves work and interpret open banking changes. So different banks do things in different ways. So a very simple example where we've done a lot of work at the moment is around status codes for payments. Has the payment finished? Has the payment completed? Banks can give you the same answer, and it can mean different things. And that's really important if you're building, say, an e-commerce use case, because you want to know that the money's arrived before you ship the goods. And if you get different answers from different banks, you're creating uncertainty, and does the proposition actually work? So data is different, the banks can be different, and then you've got standards, and standards vary. You know, there are, even in Europe, there are a number of different standards, and standards, technical things should make things easier, but differences in the standards mean that things operate differently in different markets.
The great thing about standards are there are so many of them.
Well, exactly. And trying to get them all to work together is the real challenge. I think in terms of, if I look at markets like Germany, in the German market, you have a requirement that you need to include, when you make a payment, the details of the sender account, who's sending the payment, that needs to be submitted. And that's very different to the way it works in the UK and France. And that means that when you're trying to do payments in Germany, you're adding extra friction into the journey. The customer either has to know their bank account number and enter it in, or you have to create another step in the journey for them to authorize getting hold of that bank number from them. And so you pre-populate it. So you're creating more friction. So the standards challenge. And I guess the final challenge from a sort of a macro is kind of, for interoperability to work, you've got to have the willingness to embrace open banking. And I think what we see is that in markets where the regulators and the banks were willing to tackle and committed to it, you get a much better adoption, and you smooth out some of these areas. In markets where the regulator maybe isn't so bothered, that's when it's harder, and trying to create interoperability between that market and another market is very hard. So there's a number of challenges at a number of different levels. And I think particularly in the world of open banking, what's going to make it even harder is that we're already in flight. So we're already seeing open banking being hugely successful across Europe, millions and millions of transactions. The banks have invested millions of pounds, if not billions, to put their infrastructure into place. And if we start talking about interoperability, the way we do that has got to be a way that minimizes the amount of change they do. Because otherwise, it's a bit like trying to change the engine on an aeroplane when it's already in flight, which is not really a very good thing to do.
Excellent. Well, I think it's time to bring in our panel so we can have a deeper discussion on this. So joining David, I'd like to welcome Lauren Jones, SVP Global Advisory at Consensus, Tom Bull, partner at EY, and Simon Lyons, CSO at Connect. If you could all join us for the panel, that would be great. Why don't we start in with the questions then, so we can see everyone. So, of course, we're talking about interoperability, and we made a small joke about standards, that the great thing about them that there are so many of them. Are there different types of interoperability? So Simon, I'm going to start with you. How do we know what to use best?
So Liz, thank you. First of all, I'm very famous for oversimplifying things. So forgive me if you Wikipedia the word, you'll find that interoperability works for software and for military. And the classic example of interoperability is in the use of weapons. So there's about 3 calibers of bullets used across the world: 5.56, 7.62, and 9mm. And they all stem pretty much from the Kalashnikov being used as well, from the M16, and from what we use in the German rifles as well. So we ended up with our militaries across the world, which I'm not an advocate of, by the way, fighting, but they can go anywhere in the world and generally find the ammunition they can use. And if we go beyond that, we then look at aviation. We look at the language of the sky, which is the phonetic alphabet: Alpha, Beta, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Tango. Tango doesn't come after Foxtrot, by the way, for those of you that are English pedants. That's my mistake. We find that the language of the air is English. We find that air traffic control run out of Belgium is unified and standardized. Now, they're very much sovereign and jurisdiction-based things. They're governed by governments. We have David here from MasterCard. Probably the best example of interoperability for me is travel. Because if we look at the travel market, there is something called the Global Distribution System. And you want to travel and book a hotel, a flight, you want to book a taxi, you want to book a transfer, you can use one system which has aggregated and created a common way for you to communicate across all those barriers. So we've got 2 kinds of it for me. We've got ones that are governed by sovereign nations or governments or jurisdictions, and we've got ones that are driven by commercial demands as well. And the 2 of them, never the twain shall cross. Because it's very, very rare you will find a government or a jurisdiction that wants to make a commercial entity unless they do it. And the final one I finish you off with is have a look at your passport. You can go to, I think it's 147 countries around the world today with a UK passport, whether you have the burgundy one or the blue one. you can swipe it and your details will come up on the screen instantly. So all those countries work the same way. So I hope for me that gives you an overview that interoperability isn't just about banking. It's not just about open banking, of which I'm probably the most vocal advocate on the planet of it. It's really about making things work in different places so it's easier for everybody.
I wish someone had told that to the officials at Schiphol Airport in Money 2020 and 2022, because they weren't having any of the British passports going through then. It was a bit of a punishment. But Lauren, I mean, I wanted to ask you as well about different types of interoperability, but how do you know what's best to use?
Interoperability is one of those words that we often use, but can mean various different things to various different people. And I think from a payments perspective, we see it as this utopian vision, and we've been talking about it for the best part of 20, 30 years, and we still haven't achieved it. But I think there are various different types of interoperability. I think arguably from an open banking perspective, we're very much in the first phase, which is local interoperability, the exchange of data between different parties, but within a specific country or region. So I think, from a UK and European perspective, we're largely there to various different degrees of success. I think what we're starting to see now is we're moving into more industry vertical interoperability, where we're looking at different data sets across financial verticals, much more moving into open finance, so mortgage space, insurance space, and how do we integrate those different data sets together? And then finally, we're kind of looking at the kind of cross-border interoperability, which I think is the real utopia, multiple different data sets across multiple different jurisdictions. And that is much, much harder to achieve. And it's not just about standards, it's about regulatory interoperability, which I think, we'll come on to later in the panel.
So it's interesting. We've got a question from the audience, but it's about sort of diverse regulations and economic structures. And that kind of leads me to my next question. It's related to looking at how you create the same experience in different markets and the regional differences when it comes into terms with interoperability. So Tom, I wanted to ask you about that. How do you manage that with different markets, different regulations, and create that same experience for the customer?
Yeah, I guess, from what we see is often the global banking market feels like it's often de-globalized, in recent years, major banks exiting from non-core markets around the world, etc. So part of what's kind of so exciting for us about open banking is, new opportunities for kind of global collaboration, global business building, technology enabling that, lowering barriers to entry. And kind of, a bit like the internet, where groups like Internet Engineering Task Force has really managed to kind of build a hugely successful and consistent global internet. There's some real lessons in there about the power of consistency for those operating in the open banking market. I think when it comes to building and running a business, obviously it's often a bit of science and a bit of an art from what we see from our clients around operating across borders. So obviously there's a core kind of foundational component of that around what are the quality standards, what's the way we communicate with our customers, what kind of values do we want to embrace as an organization. But then the more you start to globalize, real disciplines come into play around defining operating processes, so you can start to uniformly adopt that across markets. You start to move from a technology team that's geared up around serving the home market to needing to serve a disparate set of global markets, and needing to kind of build the real muscle within the technology organization to do that, and the muscle within local market teams to know what to ask for, on the technology roadmap to support those local needs. So of course you need to localize where necessary, but try and keep that global efficiency, as David mentioned, to drive efficiency. I think one of the most powerful things we see is just working with partners who can really support that roadmap, and hopefully finding partners who share a view of the kind of global roadmap and rollout that can be a super powerful enabler to opening up new markets in a consistent way.
It's interesting. I'm going to move on because I love these questions about defining things, and we're talking about this global payments infrastructure, but I really wanted to look at what we actually mean by cross-border. So Lauren, I'm going to go back to you for this. Like, what do we mean by that when we're talking about cross-border?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a payment sense, we've largely defined that over many years. It's when the payer and the payee are in separate countries, and never the two shall meet, to use Simon's words. But I think it gets a bit more opaque when we start to talk about open banking. In conversations we've had for Summit, where the data user, the customer, and their kind of provider, if you like, their TPP is in another country. For others, it's when the TPP and the bank are in another country. So I think we already still haven't created a set of definitions around what we really mean by cross-border data sharing. I think we're starting to solidify around the view that it's where the bank and the TPP are in different countries. But I think, cross-border also doesn't necessarily need to mean every country to every country and opening up access, at a global level. As we've seen kind of primarily in the instant payment space, cross-border initiatives have tended to focus on where there are strong trade corridors or where it makes sense from a volume or a value perspective, where there have been existing like monetary or political unions. So, for example, obviously the EU being the classic one, but when you talk about the ASEAN market or the Pacific Alliance, other countries that have clubbed together, if you like, to create a union where there is, like I say, strong transaction volume. And I kind of see that making sense a lot in the open banking space. So I don't think necessarily when we talk about cross-border, we should automatically assume it's every country in the world, every citizen of those countries is sharing data with every other country. I think it's more probably you'll see regional pockets of activity taking shape.
Interesting. So, David, I'm going to bring you back in the conversation. It seems weird asking MasterCard what cross-border is, but in terms of the context of open banking, I mean, how would you define it?
Yeah, no, I agree with Lauren. I think there's two ways we think about it. I think there is very much this area around cross-border, that the transaction is cross-border, whether it be a payment or a data flow, in terms of I'm in one market and the supplier is another market. So I think we absolutely see that. That's kind of one version of it. I think the other version that we have is what we see from a kind of a provider perspective is that they want to operate in multiple markets, and therefore the ability to operate across borders. The individual transactions may be domestic, staying within a market, but as a company, I want to operate in France and Spain and the UK and the US, and I want to be able to operate in each of those in a similar way as possible. And I think that's kind of the other way in terms of when we think about cross-border, as well as in the traditional cross-border payment sense, that's kind of the open banking lens that we would bring.
I'm going to stay with you here for the next question. I mean, should we be thinking beyond standards? Like what else should we be looking at?
Yeah, no, I risk, having seen Helen's sort of entry to sort of set Lauren up for this question, I risk stealing her thunder. But I think
I'll go to Lauren next. Don't worry.
That's all right. We'll get there. So I think one thing is that standards are very important. I think technical standards, the starting point is getting a core level of technical standards that the industry has bought into is the baseline for interoperability. So technical standards are absolutely key. But then on top of that, I think in terms to get true interoperability, you have to think more broadly. It is about things like having commonality in terms of legal terms and the laws that are associated with the transaction. I think you've got to think about how disputes are handled and how you would handle disputes. I think you've got to think about common commercial models as well. How can you create a commercial model that works across multiple markets? And think about how liability works as well. And kind of, if things go wrong, who's there? So to make true interoperability, you've got to layer on more than just can they technically talk to each other, which is vitally important. But to get a true interoperable market, you need to think about some of those other factors as well.
So, Lauren, I'd love to bring you in here. What else should we be looking at beyond standards?
Yeah, I mean, Helen and David are making me sound much wiser than I really am. But yeah, I mean, standards are just one piece of the puzzle, right? When we look at instant payments, and I like to think that it's an interesting analogy because there isn't actually much new under the sun here. Where these are conversations we've been having for a long time around cross-border interoperability. Instant payment still hasn't achieved that in over 20, 30 years of, pretty heavy deployments around the world. We still haven't achieved this kind of, coherent interoperability at a global level. But I think it's a marriage of standards, which are clearly, vital. And when we talk about standards, I like to kind of we don't need to focus just on API standards. Obviously, API standards are the way individual parties communicate with each other, but there are other standards as well, like security standards, identity standards, authentication standards. There's a whole raft of standardization that needs to happen in both communities or whoever is involved in the cross-border initiative. I think, from the payments world, there's a lot of mapping organizations out there. There's lots of organizations that can map between various different standards. You said the famous standards quote early on, Liz. There are so many of them. And, you know, lots of businesses make a lot of money out of there being many of them. So I don't see open banking kind of really making a huge difference here. I think there are many organizations that can support multiple formats around the world. The much bigger challenge is harmonization around rules, around operational processes, around legislative frameworks, you know, who can do what and with what data. And that differs wildly between countries. And I think, you know, not even to get into kind of data portability rights and legislation and offshoring data is a really big issue. And I think, you know, the technical challenge is an easy one to fix. The legislative and regulatory challenge is much, much harder and will take sufficient, you know, regulatory input from central banks and other kind of competition regulators around the world. You know, obviously the European Union has mutual recognition of licensing that allows for passporting, which is fantastic, but you know, that's not a given in other parts of the world. So I think there's a lot still to work on from the legislative side that requires, you know, fairly senior buy-in and political will.
I'd love to bring Simon in on this discussion. As Lauren said, it's more than just API standards. Where else should we be looking beyond?
I'm going to be the voice of unreasonableness. When we got the open banking standards in the UK, we had a mandate. So the CMA gave a really big stick for it to happen, because to get adoption in the market, you've got to get it set up first of all. It's very hard, and you need two things. You either need a jurisdiction giving you a mandate or a regulator giving you a mandate, when you need an enormous commercial benefit. Now, we can give two examples of them. If you look at MasterCard and the other schemes, I don't recall their names, travel and the standards they create across the world, you needed a card to work in every country. So I think it's TDS and VCF5, I think, are the formats now. MasterCard said every single one that comes back, it's the same every single time. But there was a commercial need because the commercial model supported it. When we look at open banking in the UK, we had the CMA 9 that were mandated to go and build something out. And we look at those standards, and everybody, with all due respect to the order, it said it will create competition in retail banking, give a greater choice to retail and small business consumers. It didn't do that. It gave corporates the best tool you could possibly imagine. And the proof of that is look at HMRC, look at Sage Zero QuickBooks. So what you had was they wouldn't use it until they knew it worked, but it wouldn't work until they could use it. So the mandate gave the framework to build the bottom piece as well. And I think with standards as well, we always see them as this finite thing, these tablets of stone taken up onto the mountain. They're not. They should be evolving. I used to work in standards at Pay UK, and I'll give you the perfect example. In the UK, built on open banking principles, on a trust framework, is confirmation of payee. There's 452 banks mandated for it by October 31st this year. I'm in the middle of it. It's being picked up all over the world. We are going out as a business in 3 weeks out to another territory to deliver this for somebody else, a full ecosystem. So what somebody's saying is, hey, what you did in the UK, can we pick up and do what you did and drop it somewhere else? And the reason for that is this. What they originally thought it would do again, the high value use cases are not that. They're absolutely not that. They are materially proved in hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds of the savings to be outside of that. So what do we do? Look at beyond standards. We've got to look for massive commercial benefits, and we've got to look for our trigger point, our point that will make it happen for us. And I think we should be much more open that the build it and they will come might not be the right answer. What the right answer will be is, who are the people who are going to benefit from it, and let's make sure the benefits are called out before the features. If I could stop one crime in my world, it would be stop talking about how something works and start talking about what it does. I think it's really important.
So we've got a question from the audience that I'm going to bring in, because it seems simpler than it is, and it's does anyone foresee the need for a global body overseeing open banking standards and interoperability? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, not even SWIFT is completely global. I mean, that seems like a simple question, but it's rather complicated. Whether that would, I know I saw you shake your head, Simon, so I might have to go with you just with you one answer.
I don't live in the ideological world. How on earth would you get everybody to agree? And I see what people say, but it is very much, you know, aim for something you can achieve. We've never achieved a global standard that's been accepted, from the Geneva Convention through to the Warsaw Pact, through to Schengen, through to the EU, through to anything that any country has ever adhered to. If we look at the conflicts in the world at the moment, they've broken every single UN agreement that's gone around. So how the hell are we going to do it for banking? There's a very important rule here as well. If you have one standard, you have no innovation. And multiple standards and competition across the world, be it our good friends at Consensus, be it Radian building out there, be it Banfico, be it anybody building out an ecosystem as well. Competition creates brilliance. So actually, I think the saddest day in the world would be if we ever got a Jedi High Council running the world of standards. It would be a disaster for all of us because we'd never go further again. The next generation will do more than we've ever done.
Yeah. So before we move on to beyond banking, anyone else wanna have a comment on that, or
Yes,
anyone?
please.
Go for it, Lauren.
I totally disagree with Simon on that one, I'm afraid. There are, with the right political will and incentive, there are standards out there that are very well adopted. Granted that, you know, finance has, particularly retail banking, has some nuances from country to country that make cookie cutter style impossible. But there are some pretty impressive standardization initiatives out there. If you look at the LEI adopted by the G20, which is massive counterparty risk off the back of the financial crash. If you look at ISO 2082, adopted in every major market around the world for payment transactions. It
Centrally,
can,
though, all centrally, you're talking about. None of them
no,
are used.
no,
Yeah.
no,
So we've got no, hold on, we've got no LEI inside our accounting platforms in the UK because I tried to do it. We've got ISO 2022 in settlement, and then we've got what we need is the only way we'll ever get those standards in is machine to machine banking, and open banking is a chance to do that. But do you not think that the view of getting there stops us? We have to grant the next people their brilliance and their ingenuity. And if we ever stop and say we've got this body that does it, I find that always baddies end up with sort of older people doing it as well. Like me, I'm 52. I'm too old now. I need people now that can push the barriers and find out more.
I think that, I mean, it's an age-old adage, the you know, standard versus innovation debate. But I think, you know, a base level of standardization is absolutely required for innovation.
I agree with that.
You get so much fragmentation, it's impossible to make progress. And bodies like ISO, whilst incredibly slow because they are 30, 40 plus countries all trying to agree on the same thing, there is a level of intellectual capital there that shows that this can be done. But it requires a level, like I say, of will and desire to come together and create even things like how to use ISO in an API standard, for example. Every country is doing it differently.
I think we found our next topic for the campfire. We'll go a long thing, but I wanted to move on to talk about you know, the interoperability, because I was looking at, you know, we get in our banking bubble, but what about moving beyond banking and looking at, you know, what industries are driving adoption? So Simon, I'll stay with you. Where are we looking beyond banking?
You've got to look at fragmentation, haven't you, and stuff. So we talk about cross-border as well, and Lauren was really correct to say it's not just about foreign transactions, but there's a lot of people making a lot of money out of FX. It's a very, very lucrative business. I think if you look at sort of the core banks in the UK, take the big six, you've got lending is the pillar of salt of banking, you've got liabilities, and you've got FX and, you know, non-interest based revenue. You know, MasterCard are on the phone as well. They must make a reasonable, probably a very reasonable amount of money out of it. So you're going to have a lot of resistance for people wanting to change your markets. So you need to look at the markets and look at the industries that are losing something from it, and they're actually not benefiting from it. And I think a very, very good one is energy. From what we've just seen through the political climate of the last couple of years, through the pipeline that's gone down, I'm afraid the name of it escapes me as well, from look at what we're doing shipping in coal in Poland, and we've got countries that are bringing energy across in those commodities as well. It's a real classic one. Lord Holmes did his trade bill, the electronic trade bill. And one of the first key steps, and this actually backs up what Lauren's just said, I'm going to criticize myself, is it's the acceptance of an electronic document as opposed to a physical document. Now, we've only just got in the UK to the point where we can use an electronic signature, a thumbprint or a password to say, I want to give consent. And that step in itself for me is absolutely seismic, that changes what we can do across the world. We've got to get to where we look at these industries where the exchange of information can be given on a digital consent. And you can only do that with an interoperability and within an ecosystem. But for me, when we look at those, classic ones are energy. Commodities are obviously very, very, very key to this as well. The next issues in the world will run around commodities. If we look across at Suez at the moment and what's happening there. And I think the really obvious one we're going to have as well is items that are tokenized. So I'm not talking about the monkey or that chap that sat on the bench as well, or a Jack Petriano that's there as well, but we will have tokenized commodity that never actually reaches us, but there is ownership for it. And I think that's it as well. But the options are limitless. I think there's a never-ending list.
I don't think a week goes by where someone doesn't talk to me about tokenization. So we'll all be tokenized someday. So Lauren, what about beyond banking? What are some of the industries where you're seeing beyond banking driving this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real kind of value in open banking is the convergence of banking and payments with other industries, right? I mean, a payment is essentially the end result of a business process. So, you look at, heavily paper-based industries, you look at land ownership, trade finance or logistics, I think they're huge areas where open data can add real value. I think because they are paper-based means the size of the prize is massive, but also the route to get there is challenging. So I think, things like supply chain, logistics, trade, huge value. Things like advertising and royalty distribution is another area that I think, a huge money-making industry. Advertising, the likes of Google, Apple make most of their money from that. So I think, those are the types of industries that I can see real value. And I think they can learn from what we've done in open banking and apply it, the good bits at least, in their industries. And I think the real value, like I say, is the convergence of open banking into other areas.
So these are the questions that I think we're going to have everyone chime in on. So David, I'd love to hear your views on beyond banking and some of the industries driving them.
Yeah, I think Lauren touched on it. There's data. I think that's where bringing together the power of the data that is in the banking industry with utilities, with the pension schemes, with property, whatever it is, pulling all of that together, I think that's where some really powerful propositions will come from. And I think being able to do some of that internationally, again, is sort of repeating those models and being able to do that on a consistent basis, I think will be really important. And I think that the challenges within data are quite big around how do you make sure you get consistency of data. There's always going to be unique data for different markets or different sectors, but then making sure the underlying core bits of identification information is common will be the kind of the important bits to really drive that kind of international sort of data exchange and the propositions from propositions that come off the back of it.
So Tom, what do you think? What are some of the industries you're seeing outside of banking driving this?
Yeah, I think there's probably a need for it to be quite pragmatic, because I think there's it's easy to get quite visionary about the extent of that kind of opening up across non-financial services verticals. But what we've seen from the open banking journey is that significant kind of workload in getting there and then refining and kind of discovering what works. I guess I'd like to see probably quite a kind of thoughtful approach to what are some of the big societal pain points that we can start to address through this in cost of living crisis, in kind of energy poverty, etc., and starting to kind of go after some of those kind of use cases that help people navigate quite kind of difficult commercial structures, find their way to getting the best deal, find the way to kind of living more kind of economically sustainable lives. And maybe there's some kind of scope to go after some of those use cases. So is it in the grocery segment or the fuel segment, etc.? Maybe some of those things could come first.
So I want to move on and talk a bit about user trust and satisfaction. I'm going to stay with you, Tom, for this question, and then go to Lauren, because it kind of relates to a question that came in from our audience, which is talking about data protections and protecting consumers' data privacy. I mean, in terms of cross-border interoperability, how is that going to affect that user experience and really keep that trust with the consumer? Tom, how are you seeing that?
I think trust is just such a big topic, isn't it? When it, particularly in the financial services context, are your expectations met or not? Are you getting a good deal or not? Is there real transparency in the process you're working through? Do you know exactly how your money is, where your money is at a given point in time? To one of the points made earlier, and how do things get handled? If something goes wrong, is that a quick and efficient process, or does that suddenly get a whole lot more frictionful than the kind of onboarding and the initiation journey was? So I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that, and customers often familiarity of brands and key players in the market is often a bit of a marker of trust, and it can help help consumers navigate that. And of course, as you go more global and some of those brands become less familiar, there could be a role there to is there a kite mark type debate around TPPs when it goes to that kind of broader global piece. I think that there's important stuff and a lot of stuff we've learned in the UK journey. Disclosure less can be more, and about getting the most information, the most important information very clearly conveyed, rather than pages and pages of terms and conditions, etc. So,
no one reads.
yeah, exactly. So just being really clear and kind of concise in in the delivery of that stuff. And I kind of hope we can avoid that. What we see in almost that kind of IBAN discrimination, quite type point across Europe, where much as there is harmonisation, those very small differences, to the point made earlier, local customs and practice create real grit in the machine, and I think that will really erode trust the more that is allowed to happen.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. That sort of trust and data protection comes up a lot in conversations around open banking. So Lauren, I mean, how do you see kind of cross-border interoperability, working to mitigate some of those fears?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust is quite an esoteric concept. What you find trustworthy, maybe I don't find trustworthy. And I think from an open banking perspective, trust really starts with that relationship between the banks and the fintech community. As we've seen in the UK, in Europe, every country that kind of embarks on an open banking journey, it's quite an acrimonious relationship in the beginning. The banks kind of feel they're taking their pie. The fintechs feel like the banks are making things really hard for them. And it's quite a like I say, acrimonious relationship. But I think there's a lot that can be done to kind of mitigate that. And that's not just true for the cross-border space, but for the domestic space as well. In the implementation of trust frameworks, we've seen, API conformance suites really helping to ensure that everyone is complying with the rules and everyone can trust each other. We see, central directories, obviously our space, being really, really important in that. And, Tom mentioned it as well, robust dispute management processes. And I think when the banks and the fintechs feel comfortable in the safety and the security of the environment that they're working within in open banking, that trickles down to the consumer. They get a robustness of service and innovative products based on that kind of core trust at an industrial level. And I think, the UK is a good example of that. But where I think in other markets, it's been quite interesting to observe is also around the communication to the customer. We all agree that customers don't care about open banking. We don't need to talk to them like we talk amongst ourselves. But they have been told for generations to not give their, information to, random fintech companies that they've never heard of. I think there's markets in Asia that have investigated that quite strongly around how to communicate and provide a consistent message to the customer that is actually okay. Now there are new fintechs in the market that can be trusted. So I think the trust concept is very multifaceted, and it's not just about how can I build trust in individual consumers. It's how can we build trust about open banking in general as a concept at an industry level. I think there are markets that have done a fantastic job of that, but we have a way to go.
So so looking at markets that have done a job, so why don't we focus now on the UK and the role kind of the UK can play in shaping some of these sort of global rules. So Tom, I mean, what UK is often kind of the fintech hub of the universe, in my opinion. How can it kind of play a leading role with open banking globally?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of more than just gone 6 years of experience in open banking, which is incredible, and I think we've learned so much about what works. Lauren really touched on it earlier. So much more than the technical kind of API standard being critical to deliver a successful ecosystem, and the power of things just being highly operationally effective, and very quick response times on APIs, the power of really clear and consistent consumer journeys that are delivered consistently across the banks, and there's kind of a wealth of practical experience from stemming from that, and frankly I'm so pleased that we've become such exporters of these skills, through organizations like Consensus, Radium Ozone, etc. I think that so we've got an incredible story to tell, and we that is now commercializable and becoming incredibly globally commercially successful. I think there's good work that DBT, FCDO are doing, to support the kind of trade and kind of export of these skills. And I think there's probably more to do that, particularly programs like the FCDO's Prosperity Fund, initiatives really working in middle income countries and bringing some of the best of the UK skill set to those markets, really making open banking a big part of those programs and kind of exporting that expertise powerfully, through initiatives like UK FinTech Week, coming up in April, where dozens of delegations come into those kind of events from around the world, making sure we use those kind of opportunities to continue to sell and to tell what's an incredibly powerful story, and not one that now is a story of renewal as well through the JROC work and continued evolution. Because they absolutely agree with the points earlier. Those standards, if they become static, they become stale, and what is incredibly powerful and energizing for the community and a driver of further adoption is that sense of them being a good set of standards that are an evolving set of standards and with a roadmap of ambition and functionality that comes on stream further down the line that people will invest against, because they know there's good standards there now, but they're going to be even better in future.
Excellent. So, Simon, I know you're not in favor of a global Jedi Council to govern all this, but how do you think the UK will play? What leadership role should they play?
Being first is a curse and a blessing, because you criticize what you don't do, but you're lauded for what you did do. And I think what's happened is there's nothing like proof. So, we can talk about what we could do as well, but if we look across Brazil, where the insurance industry is using, a trust framework that's developed in the UK, and they had a go at doing it in a different way with central software, whereas in the UK, we asked banks to build all their own software. Lessons learned. Australia, Osprey Plus, I think it's Connect ID is one of the other ones as well, going doing it. There's other Antipodeans down there going working. I think the one thing the UK's got to do is we're very lucky as well. The phone rang a lot when you work at OBIE, and they assume excellence and they assume experience. I think we're going to make sure we look around the world and look at what other areas have done and learned and done better than us, but also look at what we've got for the framework. The mandate we had was critical, and the standards we had were absolutely critical. Lauren makes a really good point I applaud, which is about ISO standards in payments. Open banking should have done ISO 20022 in its API standards for payments, because then it would have given us a blueprint to pick up and move. But the biggest thing we can do from taking from the UK learnings is look at who adopted it. So if we look at who adopted it, and we're very honest with ourselves about what we wanted to happen and what did happen, we revolutionized bookkeeping. And by revolutionizing bookkeeping, we revolutionized accountancy. And by revolutionized accountancy, we gave more chances for lending. And if you Rhodesley back to lending, it's important. And the final comment I would make, and I think it's the most important thing, is historically, legacy business has lots of layers in them. So if you look at the insurance business, it has broker, underwriter, client. Lending has bank, broker, credit broker, client. We have lots of layers where people are taking something all the way through the layer. And the biggest benefit of interoperability is, and I'll be happy to be disagreed with this, you remove the layers. You let people get straight to the source of the commodity. So the buyer-seller relationship is simple. I think the travel, the GDS, David, the MasterCard run as well, they brought the consumer or the business that's going to go and buy business travel into one place to be serviced. And I think that's a very, very important message. So I think what the UK's got to do is, instead of looking at how we did it, we've got to look at what it delivered and take that message around the world. And I think other people are doing it, to be honest with you, in some places better than us. But if we look at what's going to happen in the States and what they're going to do and the challenge they've got just simply with scale, because it's a big battle as well, we've got to look and make sure we look at micro use cases, but high value use cases that then can become wider and wider and wider. And I feel we have a very good story to tell. And if I'm permitted to be slightly controversial as well, I don't think we're telling it well enough right now. I think we've got a really, really good story to tell that we can tell a lot better than what we do now. And the problem is it didn't do what it was designed to do. It did something so much better.
All right. So we're going to try to attempt to give everyone a minute to answer the next, to have a final word. So I'm looking at, for all of you to kind of predict what you think will be kind of the best opportunities to emerge. So try to keep your answers concise so that we can get in on time. So Lauren, I'd love to start with you. What do you predict will emerge as some of the best opportunities?
I mean, I think in the cross-border space, we're going to see completely different use cases being successful than the ones that we have seen in the kind of retail, domestic, open banking ecosystems that we've seen in the UK and Europe particularly. I mean, largely those use cases are focused, not in large part, but mainly because of the regulation and the restrictions of the regulation around transactional account data, which, you know, I'm probably less enthusiastic than Simon about some of the opportunities that presents. But I think as we start to get into the cross-border space, we need to switch our vision towards things that genuinely can be attacked by that kind of cross-border open banking. And for me, that's really kind of trade finance and the kind of logistics space, supply chain management, but with finance. You know, and all roads back, you know, roads lead to lending. You know, that trade finance piece is massive, and I think can be really helped by some kind of global viewpoint on how open banking can support that. I think as well, when you look at, you know, what is it? Somewhere between 5 to 10% of the world live outside of the country that they were born. I'm one of those. I think remittance, again, and tying remittance payments with data will also be a massive use case. I suffer dramatically for not having that in Belgium. I wish it would happen sooner, but I think, you know, that's definitely got a huge value proposition that isn't being tackled at the moment.
Yep, I'm with you on that. David, what do you predict?
Yeah, no, I think in terms of in a pure kind of pure cross-border sense, then I think it'd be payment-based opportunities using the likes of the SEPA infrastructure. I think that would be the basis of the rail, where I can see a lot of kind of cross-border open banking-driven activity coming from. I think in terms of from data, I think will be harder. I think it'll be harder to get data use cases working. But I think where it stands that the best chance is kind of where you can start with kind of the basics of the data, the kind of the consistent core of data use cases that are replicated in all markets. So whether that be around income verification, account owner verification, identity services, I think those are the ones that will start being the use cases that will start going consistently across border first. I think the more sophisticated ones where you need to analyze and categorize data is harder. Because I think data categorization from different sources is a really difficult act to solve.
Maybe something for AI in the future. Simon, what are some of your predictions?
We're a bit bonkers, so humour me. We have a massive issue with financial inclusion in the UK and in the Western world. So we've got a lot of people in this country that they can have a bank account for. Million. I've spent 15 years of my life working in it, and I feel incredibly passionate about it. And I work with credit unions and all sorts of things because of it. I personally believe that the standards we have driven will give us the chance to change the way that credit scores are defined for citizens. I think the historical and the legacy way that we look at credit, which is basically on failure. So you can't get a business credit score unless you've got a P&L published, which could be 19 months after your trading year. You can't get any personal data until you've failed payments or until you've made payments. We always work on failure data. If I take the open banking standards at the moment, we give a chance to give a real true view of people's financial health, which is cash flow. And every time you go to a bank, they don't ask you for your history, they ask you for a cash flow. If you're a business, you're going through those doors. Now, extrapolate that and take it further. There's a risk profile for these people that have got this particular demographic issue as well. And we've got low ones and higher ones as well. I think the interoperability piece after open banking gives us the chance for people to underwrite citizens in other countries and provide credit in different ways. I think the biggest and highest benefit we will get from true interoperability, and as Lauren said before, it could be between just two countries, or it could be between just two entities in two countries. It doesn't need to be a global thing. Allows us to service things differently, because the risk appetite in one place might be wrong, the cash position might be different in another, might be a bit long and they're a bit short over there. That bettability of people's affordability, credit, I&E, whatever you want to call it, I think will open up lots and lots of opportunities. And I'll give you some real world ones as well. We're looking at Apple using open banking. Where did this start? It started in the UK. Okay, just get your flag out. It started in the UK. You don't need to say anything else. That means that we got so much right, because Apple, which is they operate in 79 countries around the world to sell their device, and they launched on our standards. But are Apple going to launch a bank? No. They're going to go and do underwriting for devices. They're going to go and work out what you can afford from your device things. Now think about the value of that data, and then think about how transportable that data is across territories, but then think about the exchange of it as well. It's a little bit whatty, and I apologize for going a little bit outside the box, but I genuinely think that the purchase of goods and the underwriting of goods is something that interoperability creates, but it's at a micro level, it's at a citizen level, and I really hope it does, because it'd be great.
I like that idea of a portable credit rating. So it's interesting to look at. So Tom, you are going to close us out with your predictions.
No, I love those ones. I think that's brilliant. And I really get that pain point. People move to new countries and the data just doesn't come with them. So a way of bringing that is powerful. But I think even things like just cross-border P2P payments, often even with some fantastic FinTechs that solve for that exact problem, I think often a lot of manual data entry, and can be quite a clunky process. So even things like big payment initiation journeys, cross-border, can be powerful stuff that really makes people's lives that little bit easier. So I think that's exciting as well.
Excellent. Everyone, Lauren, David, Tom, and Simon, thank you for a very, very excellent conversation and discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Superbly hosted, and a huge thank you to everybody. Liz, I'm curious, how would you sum up that panel?
Passionate about payments.
Really passionate about payments. Thank you, everybody. It's absolutely superb. A big thank you to the panel. Again, thank you, Liz. And also a thank you to the OBE team that work incredibly hard behind the scenes to put this all together. I will, with OBE, sharing this online, and all the panel will have their own clips, so do look out for it online. And all that really remains, because I cannot match that, seriously, all that remains is please do share this content. I'm going to be rewatching it. There was some amazing experts, so it's worth rewatching again. And all that really remains is to say thank you for joining us, and take care, and we'll see you next month. Thank you very much. Bye for now.